Welcome to another edition of Republican Stronghold, where we interview various candidates for public office in the GOP primary. And today we have with us Lesli Fitzpatrick, who is running for the Court of Criminal Appeals, Place 3. Welcome, Lesli. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Carol. Glad to be with you today. Thank you so much.
Excellent. So the first thing that we usually do is ask you to talk a little bit about your background and what brought you to the point that you want to run for this office.
So I am Lesli Fitzpatrick. I am a fifth-generation Texan. I was born and raised in Lubbock, Texas, and moved to the Permian Basin. So I spent the first 43 years of my life in the panhandled Permian Basin and moved to Austin, Texas in 2006 because I wanted to go to work for state government. I've been licensed for nearly 25 years this May, and my first legal job was an intern at the First Court of Appeals when I was attending South Texas College of Law. And then after I received my license, I was an assistant county attorney in the Ector County Attorney's Office, where I prosecuted over 20 cases to a jury trial and really got to cut my teeth on criminal law back then. I then went into private practice and got licensed in front of the United States Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where I did more appellate practice, filed briefs and motion practice. And I'll back up a minute. When I was in the county attorney's office after I became licensed, I was also the backup appellate attorney. I assisted our appellate attorney in that office with briefing, hearings, motion practice as well. I did criminal law the first 5 years of my legal career, and I didn't know if I wanted to be a criminal lawyer for the rest of my life. And so after my son graduated from high school, from Odessa High School in 2005, I decided to relocate to Austin and try my hand at civil law. And so I went to work for the Texas General Land Office. 8 weeks into that job, became their public information officer. And the first year that I did that job, I got over 800 requests for public information.
Wow.
And so I did a lot of writing with the Attorney General's office. I would request opinions on whether I could disclose the information or not. And then I went over to the Texas Senate, which for this fifth-generation Texan to get to work in the state capitol was a dream come true. I worked for the Texas Senate during the 82nd legislative session as a staff attorney, and so I had my hand at drafting bills for some of the senators that were submitting those to our office. After that session ended, Jimmy, my husband, and I were at a continuing legal education program. This was in July of 2011, and there was a judge from Williamson County. And we live in Williamson County. I've been a resident of Williamson County since April of 2009, and he was wanting to retire. And so when he met me, he said, "Why don't you come to Williamson County and be a judge?" And I told him that's not really what I wanted to do. And this judge had started a DWI drug court in Williamson County with great opposition, and he needed some help. And I felt like the Holy Spirit, I'm a rock-solid Christian, attended Southern Baptist, First Baptist Church my whole life, felt like God was saying, go help the man. And so I opened up a private practice in Williamson County right after that, June of 2011, and got on that DWI drug court program and was there once a week for 5 years. Didn't ask to be paid, did it as a complete volunteer. And my first judicial race was for his bench. He decided he was not seeking re-election in 2016, and so my first judicial race was for that bench, County Court at Law number 2. And I'll tell you, the good Lord above put the desire on my heart to be a judge back in 2013. And so I've known for a long time that this really is my calling. And so I had my first hand at it in 2016 and did not prevail, but the judge that did, she ended up hiring me to be a part-time court coordinator for that same DWI drug court, you know, and so we had a very amicable race when your opponent hires you after you've run, and but I still was able to have my private practice, and so I did that for a couple of years, and then I got a phone call from former Chief Justice Jeff Rose in December of 2021. I had been the president of the Georgetown Area Republican Women from 2019 to 2020, and we had a fundraiser, raised money, gave Chief Justice Jeff Rose some of the money, and tried to help him get reelected, which
We did
sadly,
that here too with the Women's Republican Club.
sadly, he was not reelected, but we were friends. So I get this phone call from him in December of 2021. Melissa Goodwin was the lone Republican on that bench. And Chief Justice Rose said, would you consider running? And it was on a Friday afternoon, I remember that. And I said, well, I don't ever make a big decision like this without consulting my God of the Bible. And so I prayed about it that weekend and decided to do it. Nobody thought I had a snowball's chance, and you know what, to win a race in Central Texas like that. It was a 24-county race.
Is that the race where you won 23 out of the 24
Well, actually,
counties?
it was 22. 22 of 24. Yes, ma'am. Yes, we 500,000 people voted for me. I won 22 of 24 counties, won on election day, outraised my opponent, but could not overcome the early voting in the two Democrat counties, Travis and Hayes. But I really think, you know, with that being a 24-county race, I got into that race, like I said, I filed on the last day to file. And in the 9 months that I ran that race, I put 23,000 miles on my car. So we really gave it our best shot. But I think that race prepared me. I never would have said yes to a statewide race had I not done that 24 county.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, because you know what's in front of you once you've done that 24 county race. And now you have to translate that to 254 counties and covering the entire state. You at least knew what you were stepping into.
Right. And what's interesting, after that race back in November of 2022, I got a phone call the next month from an employee that worked for Governor Abbott. And they were like, you ran a great race, thought you were going to win. What are you going to do next? The state of Texas needs you. And I had not taken on any new cases that 9 months that I was running. So it was either repurpose, start back up my law practice in earnest, or go back to work for the state of Texas. And I decided, you know, this would be a good time. I'd had that private practice for 12 years, survived COVID. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I applied to 2 jobs, state agency jobs, got 2 interviews, and I was hired by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, started with them in March of 2023, and this is where I'm currently employed. I'm Director of Special Litigation, not knowing that I was getting ready to run for this bench, which is huge because my agency is the one that executes defendants that are convicted and charged with or convicted to death. I have been in the death chamber 2 weeks into that job. I went down there. I've stood by that bed. And, you know, what got me into this race is back in March of last year, I went to a death penalty seminar on the campus of UT, and because I wanted to see what they were saying about the death penalty. And that was on March 3rd. And then on March the 10th, I got a phone call from the man that did my social media when I ran back in 2022. And he said that God brought my name to his remembrance to run for judge. And then 2 days after, kind of like the Jeff Rose, it's like these people are calling me up saying, we want you to be a judge. Yes. And so 2 days after that, we had a woman on death row there at TDCJ in one of our units that had been on death row for 27 years.
Wow.
And she had like a final appeal with the United States Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which I've practiced in front of, and they vacated and remanded her case back to the Amarillo District Court, federal court, where she was convicted 27 years ago under a Brady violation, meaning that evidence was withheld that potentially could have resulted in a different outcome, but we had not executed her yet. And then 2 days later, we had similar circumstance with a gentleman that's in one of our units that's been on death row for 20 years. He filed a petition with this court, and they stayed his execution. And so it was like, you know, God, I'm really hearing you. Are the odds of 2 death sentences in a row like that, coupled with the phone call, with the presentation? This court is sacred. It has the ability to determine life or death. And the reason I say that, this court, it's an automatic review of a death penalty case. If someone is convicted of whatever the crime and they're convicted to be sentenced to death, this court has to review that case. It skips the intermediate appellate court. And so it's a sacred bench.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because my former state of residence has one state Supreme Court. All cases that go to the Supreme Court go to that one. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the state of Texas actually has 2 Supreme Courts. The Court of Criminal Appeals, if I'm correct, handles the criminal cases, and then the Supreme Court of Texas handles all the other civil matters and whatnot.
Yes, ma'am.
Move up. So if you could talk a little bit about, I think a lot of people don't know that and don't understand necessarily the structure. So if you could speak to that a little bit as to that structure of the court system.
Sure. So Texas is one of 2 states out of the 50 that has what we call a bifurcated system. Just as Carol has described, us and Oklahoma are the only 2 states. And originally, our Supreme Court did hear everything, and 135, and this year will be 136 years ago, they developed this bifurcated system. And so, yes, you're absolutely correct. All civil matters are handled by our Supreme Court. This Court of Criminal Appeals is the court of last jurisdiction for all criminal matters. And as I stated, it's automatic appeal of death penalty cases. It's an automatic review of bail-related writs in regards to setting the bail. And then the rest, it's a petition for discretionary review. So meaning that you can petition the court to review your case, and they have the discretion to decide whether they're going to do that or not. But that discretionary process, it starts out, we have 254 counties with district courts that hear felonies, county courts that hear misdemeanors. If someone is unhappy in their criminal case with the outcome, then they would appeal to one of the 14 intermediate appellate courts that are structured by region. This region is the Third Court of Appeals. And then if they're not satisfied with that intermediate appellate court, then they would file a petition for discretionary review with this court.
Okay, that's really interesting. And you have such a broad breadth of background that it lends you to serving in this capacity in the Criminal Court of Appeals because of the work that you've done previously.
Right. And currently, in my role, I do inmate cases, even appeals. I work with the Law Enforcement Defense Division for the Attorney General's Office. I work with the Solicitor General's Office on our cases that are appealed to the Fifth Circuit. I even review the briefs that they're going to file on behalf of TDCJ and offer edits if I don't think they're arguing diligently enough for us. I participate in preparation for oral arguments. I almost act like a judge in that, offer up questions that I think are going to actually be offered up by the Fifth Circuit. I spent 20 years in the courtroom prosecuting and defending the types of felonies that come before this bench. I have hands-on. I've tried dozens of cases to a jury. And so, yes, ma'am. And that's why, if you'll allow me, I am the law and order judicial candidate in this race.
Well, that's exactly where I was going to go, because this race is a GOP primary. Okay, and if there's a runoff, there's a runoff, but the ultimate winner is going to go up against a Democrat in the November election. So could you talk a little bit about how important it is to hold this seat for the Republicans? We think a lot about how important it is for Congress to be in Republican hands. I'm wondering how much the public thinks about the importance of the judiciary being Republicans versus Democrats, and maybe you could comment a little bit about that.
You know, what I found out with our three branches of government, a lot of times the legislative branch is the one that tends to get the most attention, because we think if our Republican legislators are getting laws passed, you know, that support the Republican platform, you know, like right to life, you know, with the heartbeat bill and things along those lines, well, it's the judges that review those laws. And so if you don't have a Republican judge reviewing the law, you're not going to get the outcome that you expect. And so it is imperative that we hire, and that's what we're doing here. This is a vacant seat. Judge Burt Richardson is not seeking re-election, so me and my opponents are submitting our resumes, and we're asking the voters to hire the next judge for this bench. And I will tell you, I have been with the Republican Party for over 30 years. My first job was vice president of the Texas Federation Republican Women's Club in Odessa. And I've served as a precinct chair for 7 years in Williamson County. I was the general counsel to the party. I'm a former Federation Republican Women president myself. I served on 2 boards for the Texas Federation Republican Women. I even was the candidate development coordinator. I taught Republican women how to run for office. And so it is crucial. I have voted, I mean, probably what you call a super hard R. I've been voting Republican for over 30 years.
Okay, do you sleep?
I do.
I mean, that's pretty extensive. And I know from my experiences that takes a lot of time, just the involvement in the Republican Party. And I think people think a lot about the Supreme Court and who's going to appoint Supreme Court judges because of what we've seen with liberal courts. And it's important that the public understand that that is critical as well in the Court of Criminal Appeals and the Supreme Court and our lower courts as well. I know Third Court of Appeals at one point in time was solidly Republican, and now it is solidly Democrat. And you see very different decisions coming out of those courts.
Can I comment on that?
You can.
So back when I was in law school from 97 to 2000, the Third Court of Appeals was Democrat. And our law professors told us that do not rely on any opinion that comes out of that court because they do not follow the rule of law or the Constitution. And so we're back there again, just like you stated. We are back to a court that, if they're not following the rule of law, it's costing litigants more money because then they have to appeal to the next level, and there's not a certainty whether they're going to get their case reviewed or not just because of the discretionary nature of this court.
Right.
So if your intermediate appellate courts are not following the rule of law and the Constitution, it really is a travesty to the citizens of the state of Texas.
Absolutely. About how many cases come before the Criminal Court of Appeals on an annual basis?
So I haven't looked to see what they had last year, but I'm thinking petitions for discretionary review, I think it was like over 1,000 when I looked, but they only take like 40 to 60 cases. So out of that, I hate to, we're on video here, so I'm not certain, I don't have that information in front of me, but it's quite a few, but I do know that they normally just decide to take 40 to 60. And the cases that they usually look at We have 14 intermediate appellate courts, like I've stated, that have criminal and civil jurisdiction. And so there's a possibility that you could have 7 say this is the law and 7 say no, this is the law. So a lot of times this court is almost a tiebreaker.
Right.
They'll weigh in and break the tie. Or they'll take something that's really novel that needs to be determined.
Right. That's very interesting. So there are 4 of you, am I correct in that, running for this position?
Yes, ma'am.
So when people go in to vote and they're looking at those 4 names, what do you want them to remember about Lesli Fitzpatrick that will cause them to vote for you over your opponents?
So what I would like for y'all to remember is, number 1, I am the real Republican in this race. I have the experience on record. It's verifiable. I am the only candidate in this race that has spent decades in the courtroom prosecuting and defending the kinds of cases that this court hears. And like I said, experience matters. And that 20 years of experience has been rewarded by law enforcement. I've been endorsed by the Combined Law Enforcement Association of Texas, the Texas Municipal Police Association, the Houston Police Officers Union, the Houston Police Organization of Spanish-Speaking Officers, the sheriffs of Lubbock, Midland, Ector, Tom Green, Denton, Williamson, Goliad, and Galveston counties. So I truly am the law and order judicial candidate. No one in this race has been endorsed. These law enforcement agencies put these cases together, so it is imperative that your judge get these right. Also, I am the one in this race that is just ready to follow the rule of law, the Constitution. I will not sway from it. I am a strict constitutionalist. I will not legislate from the bench. You know, I have an opponent in this race that has no criminal law experience. All his experience is in the legislature, which explains why all of his endorsements are from the legislature. I feel like the 3 that are in this race have applied for the wrong job. I am clearly the most qualified and ready to take the office on day 1.
Terrific. Well, we're very excited to have you here today and the interview, and we appreciate your time. And again, this is Republican Stronghold from the Lost Pines Republican Women, and we'll see you again with our next interview.